She did not wear a uniform to prove anything. She wore plain black shorts, a faded army shirt, and carried an old duffel bag over her shoulder. She looked quiet, almost invisible, just like many mornings before. The admin officer barely looked up, before saying she could not wear that unless she was active duty. He told her to change clothes or leave the base. She did not argue. She did not cause a scene. She simply turned around and walked away, her back straight. As she moved toward the door, the shirt lifted slightly and someone noticed the tattoo on her upper back. At that moment, the room froze. That tattoo was not from a shop or some rebellious phase. It came from a mission no one outside ever knew about. A mission that shaped the future of someone still in command. The story begins in New Mexico, where the sun rose slow and merciless over the highway. It painted everything in gold light and heavy shadows. Elena Morgan drove her worn-out truck toward the gates of Fort Ridgeline. The land around her always looked close to burning away. The horizon shimmered and blurred with heat. It was silent except for old memories that surfaced without warning. This morning felt even emptier. Her hands gripped the steering wheel steady but marked by scars. A fine tremor from age made them shake, yet they held strong just as they once held a rifle. As the base appeared in the distance, Elena caught her reflection in the cracked rear view mirror. She was 46 now, her hair pulled back tight. Grey streaks cut through what had once been chestnut brown. Her eyes looked tired but not dull. She wore what she always wore for her runs. The faded army shirt, soft from years of washing. The black shorts stretched from use but still carried meaning. Her name had once been stitched in sharp thread across the chest, but time had erased it. Only a faint outline remained, a secret for those who knew how to look. A dog tag rested under her collar and it clicked softly with every bump in the road. Today was not about pride. She did not return to Fort Ridgeline to reclaim glory or show off her past. She had agreed to Sergeant Major Frank Harris's invitation because she owed something to the next group of women who were just starting out. They were young, unsure, and searching for proof that strength could come from unexpected places. Her truck rolled through the checkpoint. The young guard barely looked at her ID, too busy with his phone. She parked near the admin building. Around her were rows of new model SUVs and tight groups of recruits on the track. Their nervous voices carried through the morning air. Elena stepped out and felt the sun burn her arms. She also felt the quiet sting of judgment. She knew it would come. Two staffers standing near the side door stopped talking when she passed. One tilted her head and whispered something Elena could not hear. She caught pieces anyway. Cosplay too old, who does she think she is? She let it go. That had always been the trick. Never let them see that it landed. She pushed through the glass doors. Inside was cold air, bright lights, and dozens of eyes. Her presence set off a reaction. A young specialist named Kevin Riley slipped out his phone and snapped a picture. He sent it straight to the base group chat with a grin. The first reply came fast: "Who let Grandma play soldier?" Elena stood still at the counter, not knowing. She waited her turn while the staff behind the desk exchanged knowing looks. Someone whispered in a sharp voice, "Shouldn't she be home watching TV?" In the reflection of a dusty case, Elena saw two junior officers in perfect uniforms. They eyed her tattoo peeking out from the collar. They did not understand what it meant. To them, it only looked out of place. A trace of something they could not name. Lieutenant Eric Sanders scanned the roster with too much care. His voice polite but cold as he asked for her paperwork. Another test. Another chance to walk away. Outside, the recruits stretched while checking their phones. A meme appeared in their chat. It was her photo with a childish caption. Mason Price, one of the loud privates, laughed out loud. "What is next? Senior day at the firing range." The joke spread quick through the group. Nervous laughter filled the air. Elena ignored it. She ignored the whispers and the stares. She had felt all this before. Different faces, different places, but always the same message. You do not belong. What they could not see was that every step she took was carried by the sacrifice of others. Every scar, every faded line of ink, every ache in her body was not decoration. None of it was for show. She placed her duffel bag at her feet and stood silent. The morning light caught the tattoo between her shoulder blades. The numbers had faded but were still there. A mark from another time, from another story that had never been told. As Elena stood in the sharp chill of the lobby, the weight of every stare fell on her shoulders like dust. The whispers grew, but she stayed still. In her silence was discipline learned from long before. While others saw age, she carried the rhythm of training. While they joked, she carried memories of nights when silence meant survival. The tattoo that froze the room carried history no one in that lobby understood. It was not art. It was not rebellion. It was a reminder of choices, missions, and lives, shaped in shadows. The lines of ink told a story that no uniform could ever erase. As she waited, she thought about the road that brought her here, about the friends who never returned, about mornings colder than this lobby, about days when every breath felt like a final one. She remembered voices that had faded into silence but never left her mind. The recruits outside had no idea what weight rested behind her calm face. They saw a faded shirt and a woman too old for their world. But they did not see the soldier who once stood where they now stood. They did not see the missions that had cut deeper than scars. They did not see the order she carried inside her. Silence, and so Elena stood there. Steady quiet, marked but unbroken. She waited as the bass moved around her. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment swirled but did not touch her. She had walked through far worse, in the end what stayed was not their laughter. What stayed was the tattoo. It was a mark from history. A thread that reached into the present even when no one understood it. That was the weight she carried. The room froze because deep down they knew. It meant something larger than their jokes. Something they could not explain. And that was enough. Elena could almost feel the story building behind her back. Every smirk, every whisper, every message passed. From one phone to another. It was like an invisible wave pressing closer. It was always the same. Younger faces were quick to judge what they did not understand and too slow to ask the questions that mattered. The clock on the wall ticked louder than voices. With every minute, the air seemed heavier. The suspicion in the room kept growing. It was fed by the group chat and the easy cruelty of strangers who did not know her. To keep herself steady, she unfolded the authorization letter she carried. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. She remembered how many times she had held papers like this. Orders written in barracks overseas. Citations written in quiet rooms. Letters home written by hand in the dark while listening for danger. Outside, she glanced at her reflection in the glass again. Her back was straight. Her face was hard but patient. Behind her, 2 admin workers traded a look. One raised her eyebrows as if to ask what is she trying to prove. For a moment Elena's mind went far away. Back to another morning in another place. Hotter, louder, more dangerous. She remembered the smell of smoke in the air. The heavy ache in her legs after a long night listening for engines moving in the dark. The memory came in flashes. Faces of women running beside her. Sweat dripping. Grit in their eyes. Hope alive in their voices. Those memories lived under her skin. They sat close to the tattoo on her back. The tattoo that marked her as one of the Night Falcon. None of the people here would ever know what that meant. A sudden shout outside the window broke her thoughts. A recruit had tripped over his own laces and sat rubbing his knee while his friends laughed. The short commotion drew every eye in the lobby. Lieutenant Sanders stepped forward to the counter. His face showed concern, but his tone carried authority. "Miss Morgan, may I see your paperwork, please?" His eyes moved from her faded shirt to her face. He searched for any sign of defiance. Elena handed him the folded letter. Her hands did not shake. It was the authorization from Sergeant Major Harris. She said in an even tone that she was here to support the evaluation. Sanders looked at the papers, then at her, then at the staff who had stopped filing and now listened closely. The silence grew sharp. One staffer whispered that it could not be real. They never let the old ones back unless there was a shortage. Behind the counter, a phone buzzed. Another meme. Elena's face pasted onto a cartoon action figure with the words Operation Golden Years. Specialist Riley snickered but stopped when Sanders shot him a glare. Sanders looked again at the letter and back at Elena. He seemed to search for her name in some file he had never read. The scrutiny pressed down, but Elena felt something different. A quiet defiance rose inside her. She remembered why she had come. Harris had told her they needed someone who had lived through the worst. Someone who could show them what it meant to keep moving. That was all that mattered. That if she had to be the target of whispers and jokes, so be it. She straightened her shoulders. She met Sanders's gaze without flinching. Let them judge. Let them laugh. The truth was like the tattoo between her shoulders. Hidden but real. Sanders hesitated. His uniform was crisp, but his face showed doubt. He shifted the letter between his hands. His eyes flicked between the faded shirt and the woman standing in front of him. "This is unusual, Miss Morgan," he said at last. His voice carried politeness mixed with irritation. Volunteers are not allowed to wear the Army PT uniform unless they are on active duty. You understand the rules, I'm sure." The words sat between question and accusation. He seemed to dare her to argue. But Elena did not answer. She knew this script. She had seen it before with other veterans. The ones who carried silence instead of medals. She waited. Her face gave nothing away. One of the civilian admins leaned over the counter. An older woman with tired eyes and a hard mouth. Her voice was loud enough for the room. "Base policies are clear," she said. "If we let everyone wear uniforms just because they once served, it would be chaos. That shirt is for soldiers, not for retirees." Her colleague, a balding man, holding a stack of folders, nodded. "Rules are rules," he said. "Next thing you know, half the town will be playing army dress-up." Specialist Riley kept watching with a grin. His thumb hovered over his phone. The group chat buzzed again with new jokes. "She is going to cry. Did someone call her ride?" The laughter fed the air like static. Sanders held out a plastic-wrapped T-shirt. It was plain navy with Fort Ridgeline printed across the chest. "You are welcome to stay and help with the evaluation," he said. "But you will need to change into this. Unauthorized uniform elements are not allowed. This is about order." Elena looked at the offered shirt for a heartbeat. Something flickered across her face. Maybe anger, maybe disappointment. But it passed quickly. She did not argue. She did not protest. She nodded once and reached for her duffel. All eyes followed her. Some expected her to fight. Others seemed glad she had been forced down. A few recruits who came inside for water stopped talking and waited to see what she would do. The civilian woman shook her head. She muttered that this is what happens when people cannot let go. She told her colleague that her uncle had been the same, always telling war stories and wearing his old jacket to the store. She said it was embarrassing. The man beside her chuckled. He whispered that Elena probably just wanted attention. At that age, it was all about reliving the past. Outside, the young soldiers laughed loud. Mason Price, louder than the rest, mimicked an old woman's walk. The group burst out laughing. Even those who had not seen her picture joined in. Nobody wanted to be left out of the joke. Elena carried her duffel to a bench. She sat down slowly. She untied her sneakers with care. She took a moment to breathe, to steady herself. The humiliation was sharp, but she let it pass over her. She had done the same before. On bases, on deployments, in classrooms, back in civilian life. There was always someone ready to push her down to prove their power. She pulled off the faded PT shirt and folded it neatly. She tucked it into her bag. For a moment her back was bare. The muscles still firm though lined by age. The tattoo visible. A mark no one in the room understood, but all of them stared at. Her tattoo showed faintly under the straps of her sports bra. Elena saw her reflection in the glass and paused. She was older now but still strong, not broken, not bowed. Her face and body told a different story than the whispers floating behind her. She slipped on the navy shirt Sanders had handed her. It felt stiff and strange, nothing like the uniform she had worn before. She stood tall again, bag in hand, ready to move on. Sanders folded his arms, acting like the situation was solved. "Thank you for understanding, Ms. Morgan," he said. His words were flat, empty of any real feeling. It was just something to say to close the matter. Elena did not answer. She simply walked past him and the admin staff, each step calm and measured. Point one of the workers muttered, "It's for the best. We can't have everyone thinking they're special." The words burned a little, but Elena didn't let them stick. She kept her eyes forward, moving toward the track. As she passed, she noticed a younger woman watching her. Private Lily Thompson stood in a crisp uniform, looking both unsure and respectful. For a moment their eyes met. Lily's look was part apology, part admiration. Elena gave her a single nod, then kept walking until the glass doors released her into the bright sun. The air outside felt different, not only hotter but heavy with the memory of what had just happened. The embarrassment clung to her like smoke. Still, she pushed through it. She had worn many uniforms in her life. Today, she would wear something else: patience, strength, and the refusal to let others decide her value. She walked toward the registration tent near the track. A folding table blocked the entrance. Behind it sat a young civilian woman, dark hair pulled too tightly into a bun. Her badge glinted in the sunlight. She barely looked up from her tablet when Elena stepped forward. Name. The woman said without emotion, Elena Morgan. I'm here to help with the female recruits evaluation. Authorized by Sergeant Major Harris. Elena handed her the paper. The woman tapped at the screen, frowning. Not seeing you on my list. Do you have clearance paperwork? Elena held out the folded sheet. The staffer studied it with slow, exaggerated care, as if checking every line would decide the fate of the world. Behind Elena, a few recruits had already gathered. They shifted, whispered, their eyes on her. You'll need to wait while I verify this, the staffer said at last. She turned her back and started typing slowly, each keystroke heavy with delay. The sun climbed higher. Heat rose from the gravel and pressed down on Elena's shoulders. More recruits arrived, stretching and laughing. Their glances fell on her again and again. Someone muttered, "Guess they're not letting her through. Can't say I blame them." A ripple of chuckles followed. The group chat on their phones buzzed. Her face appeared again in fresh memes and jokes. She could almost hear the pings. Elena stood steady. Patience was a skill she had learned long ago, waiting in harsher places, in darker nights. Harris's voice echoed in her memory. They'll try to push you out. Don't let them, but doubt worked its way inside her. Would they find some reason to send her home after all this? At last the staffer returned, her expression tight. Still waiting on confirmation from administration. You'll have to wait over there. She pointed to a patch of shade far from the others. It felt like she was marking Elena as a problem, something to keep apart. Elena obeyed. She sat on the edge of a concrete planter, setting her duffel beside her. Sweat slid down her face, but she forced her breathing to steady. Her face showed nothing. Nearby staff whispered among themselves, sometimes glancing at her, sometimes turning away. The minutes stretched long and heavy. She remembered the admin worker's words. Can't have everyone thinking they're special. The recruit's stares shifted too. At first curious, then doubtful, then tinged with something sharper. Elena could feel herself being turned into a lesson, a warning of what not to be. The sun kept crawling higher. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. Each group of recruits that jogged by stole glances. Some tried to hide their curiosity. Others smirked openly. 2 young soldiers, their new stripes still stiff on their sleeves, walked past and spoke loud enough for her to hear. Probably showed up thinking she could take charge, one said. Some people don't know when to quit, the other replied, grinning. T the checkpoint. The staffer tapped at a tablet again, calling into her radio with exaggerated seriousness. Still no response from admin. She repeated like it was a national crisis. Sometimes she looked over at Elena with pursed lips, as though watching an intruder. A sergeant wandered over, his chevron shining on his sleeve. What's the delay? He asked. The staffer explained. Authorizations not matching up. Could be a clerical error. She says Sergeant Major Harris sent her, but you know how it is with old forms. The sergeant glanced at Elena, then shrugged. Regulations can't be too careful. His words were supposed to sound polite, maybe even comforting. But to Elena, they were just another excuse to doubt her. Inside the admin building, her paperwork had already passed through several hands. One person had printed it. Another misplaced it. A third now debated whether to call Harris or wait until the mess fixed itself. No one felt urgency. No one cared about the delay. Outside, Elena could almost feel the weight of bureaucracy pressing against her. Not because anyone wanted to hurt her, but because no one cared enough to speed things up. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harris appeared. Hang in there. If they give you trouble, let me know. A faint smile tugged at her lips. She put the phone away. She would not let frustration show. She would not give them that. The shade moved with the sun, leaving her more exposed. Sweat dampened her brow, her shirt clung to her back, and her patience frayed. Still she remained. She would not break, not here. Some people wanted her to explode, to shout, to prove their point. She would not. She knew there was power in silence, in waiting. 40 minutes passed. Finally the staffer walked over. Her voice was clipped, her eyes avoiding Elena's. Admin says you can proceed. But next time bring a printed copy of your clearance. Makes things easier for everyone. There was no apology. No recognition of the time wasted. Just another rule tossed in her path. Elena stood, lifted her bag, and stepped forward toward the track. Elena felt only a small bit of relief when they finally let her through. She thanked the worker, picked up her duffel, and stood. As she walked toward the track, her shoulders stayed tight. The recruits who had been watching now showed mixed looks. Some looked embarrassed, some looked tired, and some even looked impressed. They had seen how calm she stayed during the long wait. They saw how she held herself together under a different kind of fire. A few recruits looked away, but some held her eyes with a new kind of respect. But Elena knew the day was just starting. Private Mason Price sat in the shade under a half-dead tree with his phone in his hand. He scrolled through the Ridgeline recruits group chat. The picture of Elena sitting alone with her cap pulled low had already become the biggest topic on base. Specialist Riley had snapped the photo and posted it with the caption, "Commander Grandma lost on the way to bingo night." Price added a reply in seconds. He sent out a fake picture of Elena holding a walker and chasing recruits around the track. The caption read, "PT Test Senior Division." The chat exploded with laughter. 10 minutes new fake pictures started flying across phones. Elena was shown clutching a cane in one. In another, she pushed a shopping cart down the store aisle. The memes spread like fire. Recruits snickered and nudged one another as they glanced from their phones to the real woman sitting nearby. Elena sat straight and silent as if none of it touched her. Some of the younger soldiers laughed loud and could not stop, while others tried to hide their giggles. A few recruits, mostly the women, stayed quiet. They stretched their legs or tied their laces tighter, pretending not to see, but their eyes betrayed them. They too were watching. The group chat turned sharper. The jokes grew meaner. A corporal typed, "But she tells stories about walking uphill both ways to basic." Another sent, "Does the Army do refunds on Social Security?" The cruel words spread fast. Elena had seen this before. She had lived through jokes that were always aimed at those with the least power. But this time it felt different. This time it shaped the whole mood of the group. Even the staff at the track began to treat her like a joke. Each small act carried a mocking edge. Private Lily Thompson waited nearby for her own test. Her phone buzzed with another meme. She pressed her lips together and scrolled through the cruel words. She felt the pressure of the group's judgment. She had seen this pattern before. Anyone who stood out became a target. Anyone marked as different was dragged down. She glanced at Elena sitting apart. She wondered if the stories were true. Was Elena just a retired soldier who could not let go, or was there something more? Back near the tent, Lieutenant Sanders caught sight of the chat over Riley's shoulder. "That's enough," he said without much force. He still scrolled and his mouth twitched at the jokes before he forced his face back to calm. Sanders was too young in rank to stop the group outright. He was also too eager to fit in. He looked down at his clipboard, but the unease stayed with him. Elena could sense the change in the air. She had learned to read rooms. She knew the moment attention turned sour. Every time a screen lit up followed by a burst of laughter, she knew the target was her. She held herself tall. She kept her chin up and eyes fixed on the field. She refused to fold into herself. The recruits split into groups. Some worked to come up with the next insult. Some stayed out but did not stop the cruelty. Others, mostly the women, fell silent. Their confidence chipped away with every new round of ridicule. Private Thompson searched the crowd for another face that looked as uneasy as hers. She saw that the mocking was not only about Elena. It was about anyone who dared to age without apology. Anyone who tried to belong outside the group's rules. She studied Elena again and wondered if she herself could stand as strong under that. Wait. The cruel jokes moved from phones to open voices. Someone shouted, "Heard we are getting a discount at the pharmacy today." The recruits laughed. Staff members at the table shared grins. They whispered to each other just low enough not to get caught. Even the training NCO cracked a faint smile when a new meme flashed on his screen. It showed Elena leading the run from a motor scooter. By now the whole crowd had turned dismissive. The cruelty was no longer private. It had become the air they breathed, but in the shadows a few doubts stirred. Some of the women had looked forward to learning from a seasoned veteran. Now they wondered if the others were right. If Elena really was a relic, then what did that mean for them? Would they too be mocked one day for daring to keep going? Would they be punished for standing out? Elena heard the laughter. She knew the words were sharp and heavy. Still she gave no reaction. She checked her bag. She stretched her arms. She kept her breath steady. She did not beg for their approval. She had lived long enough to know sometimes the lesson was not for the ones who laughed, but for the ones who watched. Sometimes standing alone was the only way to teach what strength really looked like. After a while, the chat died down. The evaluation drew near. But the story of the morning had already been told. To many, she was out of place, out of time. She caught Lily Thompson's eye and gave the smallest nod. A private message passed without words. "You are not alone." Lily straightened. She drew in a breath she did not know she was holding. T the far side of the field, Mason Price sent one last meme. It read, "Old soldiers never die, they just hold up." The line. More laughter followed. Yet beneath the sound something else began to rise. A quiet curiosity. Some of the younger women studied Elena closer. They saw her calm, steady posture. They saw that she did not shrink. They wondered if maybe there was more to her than the jokes allowed. The sun rose higher, burning away the cool of the morning. Elena finally cleared the checkpoint. She lifted her bag and moved toward the bleachers. She felt every eye on her back, but she kept her pace even. Each step a silent refusal to be rushed or belittled. She sat at the far edge, half in the shadow, half in the light. She let her arms stretch and her shoulders roll to loosen old knots. Staff Sergeant Mike Alvarez passed nearby with a clipboard in his hand. He was a man of habit who cared little for gossip. But something caught his eye. As Elena reached up to tie her hair, the back of her shirt clung to her skin. The edge of a tattoo showed across her upper back. The design was plain, not decorative. It showed the digits 819 flanked by the wings of a falcon with talons out. Alvarez froze. His clipboard felt heavy. A memory struck him from years ago. A secret briefing where the name Night Falcon 819 was whispered. He remembered the redacted reports and the maps with heavy casualty lists. He remembered the silence that followed whenever the mission was brought up. Now he looked at Elena and the morning's jokes flickered in his mind. For the first time they seemed tasteless. She stood in front of him with scars and a tattoo most people would never understand. Sergeant Alvarez felt his heartbeat speed up. He looked around at the recruits and the staff, but nobody else seemed to notice what he had seen. Lieutenant Sanders was still strutting around, pretending to be in charge. Nobody's eyes were on Elena. Alvarez swallowed hard, forced himself to keep walking, but the image of that tattoo burned in his mind. The shadow of the equipment shed, he pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. For a second he froze. Then he dialed a number he remembered from an old classified packet he had once been briefed on. It was an emergency code, the kind of number meant only for reporting things that were never supposed to happen. The line clicked. A mechanical voice confirmed a secure channel. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Alvarez steadied his breath. "This is Staff Sergeant Alvarez at Fort Ridgeline," he said. "I believe I have a possible Night Falcon identification on site." He waited. On the other end came the faint sound of shuffling papers, low whispers, and then a voice, professional, clipped, calm in the way only headquarters ever sounded. "Repeat, Sergeant. You are confirming a Night Falcon 819 identification. Visual or verbal?" Alvarez's throat felt dry. "Visual, sir. Tattoo. Block numbers. Falcon insignia. Upper back. Individual matches profile. Retired female, currently at Fort Ridgeline, working with training support." There was another pause. Alvarez could tell more people were listening now, as if his words had pulled in a roomful of hidden ears. "Confirmed," the voice said. "Hold location. Do not engage or approach further. We will coordinate with command. This report does not leave this line." The call ended. The phone was hot in Alvarez's hand. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy with tension. He felt like he had just been pulled into something much larger than himself. Shame flushed his face as he remembered the memes, the jokes, the careless words from the recruits. What if the rumors were true? What if the woman they had mocked was the same one who had once held the line on some desperate night, giving others, men like him, a future they never even knew they owed her? Back at the bleachers, Elena sat quietly. She watched as a new group of recruits lined up for warm-ups. For the first time that morning, the mood in the crowd shifted. Some of the staff eyed her differently, less mocking, more cautious. Whispers spread. They didn't know what Alvarez had reported, but they could sense something was different. A couple of older NCOs lingered nearby. Their voices lowered. They didn't laugh now. They looked at Elena with the kind of careful interest soldiers used when they realized they might be in the presence of something they didn't fully understand. Lieutenant Sanders got a quick message on his radio. His jaw tightened. He glanced at Elena, then back at the device in his hand. His stance changed. His back straightened, his tired eyes hardening. The tension spread through the field like static. Admin workers shifted. Volunteers paused. Everyone felt the change, though nobody knew why. Alvarez walked out of the shed, careful not to meet anyone's eyes. He carried the weight of what he knew like a stone in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt the real gravity of wearing the uniform. He realized it wasn't only about following orders. It was also about knowing when to honor those who had walked a harder path before him. On the field, recruits stretched, nervous about their first run. The excitement of the challenge returned, but under it ran a different energy. Just minutes ago they had laughed and mocked. Now the laughter felt wrong, replaced by a quiet awareness that something larger was happening. Elena rose from the bench and stretched her legs. The tattoo on her back caught the sun for an instant. The numbers shone clearly, impossible to ignore. Private Lily Thompson noticed. She had spent all morning feeling anxious and small. But when she saw that mark, something in her shifted. Maybe this woman wasn't just some tired volunteer. Maybe she carried a story worth hearing. Lily's fear gave way to a fragile kind of hope. The day was not finished. It was only beginning. A hush rolled over the field when a dark government SUV pulled up near the admin building. It looked plain, unmarked, but it drew every eye like a storm cloud. The doors opened. First a junior officer stepped out, then Major Julia Bennett. Last came Colonel Travis McCall. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his ribbons shining on his chest. Silver touched his hair at the temples, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't need to shout. The way he walked made people step aside without thinking. Elena noticed the silence first. Movement across the field stalled. Phones stopped clicking. Even the shuffling of papers went still. Then she saw him. McCall. She knew his face immediately, even though time had carved lines into it. The weight he carried was the same. He stopped in front of her. Recruits straightened where they stood. Staff stepped aside. A circle of uneasy respect opened. Colonel McCall clasped his hands behind his back. His boots dug into the dust. He didn't speak right away. He just studied her, reading her scars, her posture, her silence. Finally, in a calm, deep voice, he said, "Morgan, I hear there's been some confusion about your authorization and your place here." He paused, his eyes falling briefly on the faded tattoo visible beneath her collar. "That mark on your back," he said, lowering his voice. "Where did you earn it?" The entire base seemed to hold its breath. Elena met his eyes without blinking. Northern border. Syria. Operation Sentinel. April 2001. Rear element. Night Falcon 819. Her words were quiet but heavy, carrying 2 decades of weight in a few short syllables. For a moment McCall's face hardened, as though memories of distant violence returned. Then his jaw softened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "My sister," he said, the words raw. Private First Class Monica McCall. She was with that convoy. A wave of surprise moved through the people standing around. Colonel McCall kept speaking. His voice was heavy, like it carried both pain and gratitude. He said his sister had come home alive because someone held the line when everyone else fell back. Someone made sure the last trucks reached the airfield. That someone was Elena. Elena's lips pressed together, and for a moment her hard eyes softened with grief from long ago. She said she did not know the girl's name at the time. She only knew she was in the last truck. She said they had all done what they could. McCall nodded. A faint smile tugged at his face. He said his sister had lived another 16 years. She got married, had children, and later passed away peacefully in her sleep the winter before. His gaze grew distant, but then he came back to the moment. He said that was worth more than all the medals the Army had ever given him. It was worth more than any rule about uniforms or rosters. Then he did something nobody expected. Right there on the side of the track, under the burning sun, in front of staff and recruits, Colonel McCall lifted his hand in a sharp salute. The whole field went silent. Everyone understood what it meant. It was not casual or routine. It was the highest honor one soldier could show another. He held the salute for a long time before lowering his hand with the same careful motion. Then he spoke to the crowd. His voice carried across the field with the weight of command. He said if Sergeant First Class Elena Morgan wanted to wear her uniform, she wore it. If she wanted to help train the recruits, she did so. And if anyone had a problem with it, They would take that problem directly to him. His words were final. His authority stood without question. The entire field seemed to breathe out at once. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Suspicion vanished and was replaced with something closer to reverence. The recruits who had laughed earlier now stood stiff and silent. Their faces were red with shame and awe. Even Mason Price and his friends, who had started the mockery, went quiet. They looked at each other, realizing too late what they had done major. Julia Bennett, who had arrived with McCall, stepped forward. Her voice was steady and her posture crisp. She looked at Elena, no longer judging, but now showing respect. She admitted the base had failed. She said they had delayed Elena's clearance, failed to recognize her service, and treated her without the honor she deserved. She said on behalf of the command, she apologized. She said Elena's record, her sacrifice, and her example were what the army should be about. Elena inclined her head. She did not need words. Everyone watching understood the moment. It was more than an apology. It was a lesson. Respect and honor should never be buried under paperwork or crushed by careless jokes. Bennett turned to Lieutenant Sanders, who stood frozen with shame burning on his face. She ordered him to make sure it never happened again. She said from that moment forward, veterans supporting training events were allowed to wear uniform pieces with the commander's approval. If anyone questioned it, they would bring it directly to her or to Colonel McCall. Sanders swallowed hard, then nodded. Colonel McCall then faced the formation of recruits. They had gathered in a wide semicircle, all eyes locked on him. He told them they had just seen something important. He reminded them that every base and every generation sometimes forgets where its foundation comes from. It comes from those who served before. He told them not to let rules or popular opinion blind them to real courage. If they were lucky, they would serve beside people like Sergeant First Class Morgan. He said they would learn more from her example than from any manual or training course. A soft murmur rippled through the recruits. At the edge of the group, Private Lily Thompson felt her heart beating fast. Relief mixed with pride inside her chest. She remembered the way Elena had looked at her earlier. That look now felt like an invitation to be strong, to stand tall, and not shrink in the face of mockery. Elena herself felt emotion rise inside her. Gratitude. Vindication. The ache of old wounds that never healed. She kept her face calm, but her eyes shone. McCall stepped closer and lowered his voice. He thanked her for coming back, for not walking away even though it would have been easier. She told him she came because someone had to show the recruits that strength was not always loud. Sometimes strength was simply standing your ground. McCall nodded with full understanding. He motioned for her to walk with him. Together they moved toward the front of the formation. The crowd parted with respect. Staff who had doubted her earlier now dropped their eyes or offered small nods. Mason Price, once bold in his teasing, kept his gaze on the ground. His silence was a lesson to everyone else. The mood across the base had changed. Nobody laughed at Elena anymore. Instead, there was quiet respect. A silent promise spread across the crowd. They would watch. They would remember. They would try, even just a little harder, to live up to the example they had seen that morning. The message reached every corner of Fort Ridgeline. Dignity was not something that could be taken away by age or by rules or by the cruel words of a group chat. Some honors had been earned long ago in silence. Some heroes needed no medals to prove their worth. The morning sun pressed down harder as the base returned to its routine. But something had shifted. The news of McCall's salute and Bennett's apology spread quickly, faster than rumor usually moved. For the first time, recruits stayed near Elena not to gawk or laugh but to watch her with respect. Even those who had laughed loudest earlier now stepped aside when she passed. Elena found a quiet place under the bleachers. She sat alone for a moment, her mind busy with everything that had happened. She thought of the faces who had been watching, young and old, as the events unfolded. She was not one for speeches and did not care for the spotlight. But she understood the weight of example. Sometimes one person's endurance could reset the tone for an entire generation. Footsteps approached. They were light and hesitant, but steady. Elena looked up. Private Lily Thompson stood there, holding a water bottle. Her hat was crooked and her eyes were bright but nervous. She seemed even younger up close, full of energy and questions she could not quite shape into words. Lily said softly but clearly. Her voice cut through the hum of the field. I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to say. Lily hesitated and stared at her boots before lifting her eyes again. Her voice was small but steady. She said she saw everything that had happened earlier. She saw how Elena stood tall when others laughed or doubted. She admitted she could not understand how Elena did it, how she managed not to break when so many people had something harsh to say. Elena looked at her for a moment and studied her face. She could see how serious the young soldier was. She answered. In plain words. She said it did get to her. It always did. She just learned not to show it unless it truly mattered. Sometimes the only way to teach people what was important was to refuse to bend no matter how much pressure came. If you showed weakness, then that was what they would remember. They would not see your purpose or your strength. They would only recall the moment you flinched. Lily nodded and held her water bottle tighter. She asked if Elena had always been like that, if she had always been so strong. Her voice dropped lower, almost like she was embarrassed. The question carried the same doubt Elena had carried herself many years ago. Elena gave a small smile. She said no, not always. When she first started, she doubted herself every single day. She wondered if she would ever be enough for the army, enough for her unit, enough for herself. The trick, she explained, was not about stopping the doubt. It was about moving forward anyway, even while afraid, even while people laughed or said, "You did not belong." She looked across the wide open field where recruits were already lining up for their next drill. She told Lily that one day she would find her own path, but she must not let all the outside noise drown out her reason for joining. Lily breathed slowly, as if trying to take in every word. She whispered her thanks. She said she thought that was exactly what she needed to hear. For the first time that morning, her mouth curved into a smile. It was not a careless smile. It was small, but it carried promise, the promise that she would hold on and keep trying. Lily stood there as though more questions pressed against her lips, but she could not find the right ones. Around them, the sound of boots and shouted orders faded for a moment. It felt like the world had paused, giving them space for a private exchange. Elena could feel the weight of hesitation in the young woman and waited patiently. Finally, Lily blurted out a question. She asked if it ever felt unfair that people judged Elena by her uniform or by her age, deciding what she could or could not do without even knowing her. She flushed red, but she did not look away. Elena answered gently, but her words carried the weight of many such moments. She said yes, it happened all the time. Not only in the army. People loved to measure others by what was easy to see. A shirt, a wrinkle, a grey hair, or even a rumor. It was their way to defend themselves. If they could put you into a box, then they did not have to face the question of what you might truly be able to do. She leaned back, letting the sun strike the tattoo across her back for a moment. She said the truth was that the things that mattered, courage, patience, loyalty, never showed on the outside. Often the strongest people were the quiet ones who did not speak much but stayed in place when it would have been easier to leave. Her eyes met Lily's, steady and calm. She told her that real strength was not silence, it was not forgetting who you were even while other people tried to bury you in noise. Lily's face changed as the words sank in. The uncertainty melted into determination. She looked out across the field at the other recruits who were lining up to train under the hot sun. She asked softly if it ever got easier to hold on to what mattered when the world wanted you to give it up. Elena paused and then answered with truth. Sometimes it did get easier. Other times it became harder. But it was always worth it. She told her there would be days when she would be the joke, the outsider, the easy target. And there would be days when someone else needed her to show that it was possible to keep standing even when it hurt. That was what service meant. Not the uniform, not the rank, but the choice to carry on when tired, when afraid, when doubted. She reached out and squeezed Lily's shoulder. It was both a comfort and a challenge. She said Lily might not always see the difference she made, but if she stayed true, she would help someone else find their courage. That was the legacy that mattered. Not medals, not recognition, but the quiet ripple that began with one person refusing to quit. Lily smiled, now the nerves gone, replaced by something bright and unshakable. She straightened her cap, lifted her chin, and promised she would remember. She said clearly she would try to be that person too. Then she jogged off to join her unit. Elena watched her go. She knew that all the pain and all the doubt of the morning had been worth it, if only for this. She had not come back only to prove herself. She had come to show the next generation that strength did not have to be loud. Strength could be quiet, but it could spread from one heart to another. The noon sun was harsh above them as the recruits lined up for their run. Elena stepped out from the shade. She had set aside the navy t-shirt. She wore her old training shirt again, the numbers across her back clear in the light. No one stopped her this time. There was no challenge in the air, only silent acknowledgement. The staff members and officers who had once mocked or questioned her watched with new respect. Some gave a small nod. Some murmured a quiet as she walked by. Colonel McCall stood by the edge of the track, arms folded. His presence carried weight. This moment was no longer about rules. It was about example. About the kind of stories that lasted far longer than a single morning. Major Bennett held a clipboard and coordinated with trainers, but her eyes often drifted back to Elena. She too seemed to draw strength from the older woman's calm determination. Elena took her place at the head of the group. The recruits were restless, their minds still stirred from everything that had happened earlier. Mason Price stood further back, hands on his hips, but the swagger was gone. He stole a glance at Lily, who now held her head high and kept her eyes forward. Her posture was firmer, stronger, her shoulders back, jaw set just like Elena's. The whistle blew. Elena started running at a steady pace. Her stride was not flashy, but it was strong and efficient. The recruits followed. Some tried to match her right away. Others were more careful, afraid of falling behind, but also afraid to burn out. By the end of the first lap, the effort was clear. Their breaths came heavy. Sweat poured. Their legs burned. Yet Elena kept running as she always had. Calm, steady, unshaken. She did not shout at anyone. She did not command them to keep up. She led simply by doing. Halfway through, Mason Price, who once mocked her, found himself gasping, struggling to keep pace. Lily kept going at Elena's side, stride for stride, refusing to drop back. Others rallied too. They were driven not by rivalry, but by the quiet will of the woman leading them. Even the staff along the sidelines began to cheer. Their words carried no trace of mockery now. They called out encouragement, urging the recruits to follow Sergeant Morgan. When the last lap came, Elena's breath was heavy, but her posture stayed upright. She crossed the finish line without collapse, without calling for attention. She turned back, waiting for each recruit to arrive, every straggler, every exhausted runner. She gave each one a nod or a quiet word as they came through. She had proven her point without ever needing to argue. Her example spoke louder than anything else could. The field was quiet after the run. Everyone sat in the grass, catching their breath. The air was heavy, not only with tired lungs, but with something deeper. It was no longer the same place where teasing and mocking had ruled earlier. Now there was a kind of pride floating among them. A new story was starting to grow. Someone whispered the name Night Falcon. The word spread quickly from one recruit to the next. This time it was not a joke or a way to mock her. It was said. With respect and awe, the recruit stayed silent for a while. The silence was not heavy with shame anymore. It carried meaning. They all felt that they had seen something they would remember for years. The story of Night Falcon was no longer an old ghost told around barracks. It was now standing in front of them, alive, real, and stronger than the rumor had ever been. The officers and NCOs broke apart into small groups. Each carried the morning in their thoughts. They had all witnessed something that had shifted the ground under them. Elena picked up her old duffel and her water bottle. She gave one last look at the track. Some recruits gathered near her. They were hesitant, some shy, some bold from fatigue and gratitude. Mason Price, still red from the run, came forward. His usual pride was gone. He looked almost nervous as he stretched out his hand. His words came short and awkward. "Thanks, Sergeant Morgan," he muttered. Did not realize. He did not finish the sentence. Elena only gave him a nod. That was enough. She forgave him without speaking. Lily Thompson hurried up to Elena. She was still breathing hard, but her smile was bright. She walked beside her like she had known her for years. "Will you be coming back?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying hope. Elena smiled at the younger soldier. "If they will have me, I will be here," she said. "But you do not need me for this anymore. Today you learned you are stronger than what people say." Lily grinned and stood straighter. "Maybe so," she answered, "but it helps to see it for real." Near the motor pool, Colonel McCall waited with Major Bennett. Both stood easy but respectful, like equals. "Thank you," McCall said in a tone that carried more than just words. "You reminded all of us what this place is supposed to mean." Major Bennett handed Elena a white envelope. It was sharp and official. Inside was her clearance, extended for as long as she chose to serve. "The door is always open," Sergeant Bennett said warmly. Elena gave a nod of gratitude. She did not need more words. She walked toward her old truck. Across the field, recruits stood in small groups. Some looked at her openly, some retold the day's story to others. A few were already planning the next challenge ahead. Their laughter rose into the evening air. This time it was not sharp or cruel. It was lighter, freer. It carried respect. Elena started the engine. The truck rattled to life. She hesitated for a moment. She looked back at Fort Ridgeline. The base held old memories of pain and doubt, but today it also held something new. She had changed the story here. The sun was sinking low, throwing long shadows across the parade ground. The numbers on her back glowed one last time in the light. She drove out past the gate. The wind picked up, sending dust spinning across the road. Elena felt the weight she had carried for years finally grow lighter. She knew her story would stay here long after she left. The recruits who had mocked her would remember the lesson. The ones who had watched with hope would become leaders. They would carry a new kind of strength. At the edge of the base, Elena looked into her mirror. The sight of Fort Ridgeline shrank behind her. But its mark would never fade, just like the ink on her back. Somewhere on that field a new rumor was already forming. That sometimes the quietest person leaves the loudest echo. That legacy is not written in stone or stitched in ranks. It lives inside the hearts of those who see true courage. Her truck disappeared into the horizon. One story closed. Many others began inside Fort Ridgeline. They began in the minds of young recruits who had witnessed something that could not be forgotten. Maybe today you saw yourself in Elena Morgan. Maybe you know what it feels like to be doubted or tested. Maybe you know the weight of standing alone when the world pushes you down. Maybe you too understand that silent strength can speak louder than any voice. She did not wear the uniform that morning. She only wore black shorts, a faded army shirt, and her old duffel. She looked almost invisible. Just another person on base. The admin officer barely looked at her before saying, "You cannot wear that unless you are active duty." He told her to change or leave. She did not argue. She did not make a scene. She turned to go steady and calm. As she walked away, the back of her shirt lifted. Someone across the room caught a glimpse of the tattoo on her upper back. The room froze. Everyone stopped breathing for a second. That tattoo was not from a shop. It was not rebellion. It was a mark from a mission that never made the news. A mission that had shaped leaders still in command. The meaning of that tattoo spread like fire through the silence. People stared, but no one spoke. The air itself seemed to change. Sanders took longer than needed to speak. His perfect uniform seemed like armor to cover the uncertainty on his face. He shifted the letter between his fingers and studied her again. At last he said that her presence was unusual. His tone was flat polite but edged with irritation. Volunteers were not allowed to wear Army PT gear unless they were on active duty. He said she must know the regulations. His words hovered between a question and an accusation. It was almost as if he wanted her to argue so he could shut her down. Elena stood still. She knew this script. She had watched it play out countless times with other veterans, especially the ones whose service had been hidden in shadows instead of praised with medals. She did not give them the satisfaction of a reply. Her face stayed calm and blank. An older civilian woman behind the counter leaned forward. She had tired eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She raised her voice just loud enough so everyone could hear. She said the rules were clear. If anyone could wear the uniform just because they had served once, then the base would be in chaos. The shirt was only for soldiers still on the roster, not for people who had retired. The balding man beside her clutched his folders close and nodded in agreement. He added that rules were rules. If exceptions were made, then soon half the town would be walking around playing soldier. Riley watched with a grin he tried to hide. His thumb hovered above his phone, ready to feed the group chat with another joke. The messages rolled in fast. Some said she was about to cry. Others asked if someone had called her a ride home. The room buzzed with cruel energy, the kind that feeds on making someone else small. Sanders finally picked up a plastic wrap t-shirt from the counter. It was plain navy blue with Fort Ridgeline printed across the chest. He told her she was welcome to stay and help with the evaluation, but she could not wear unauthorized uniform items. She would need to change into this shirt. His voice was still polite, but his posture stiff and final. Elena looked at the shirt for a long moment. A flicker crossed her face, anger maybe, or disappointment, but it was gone in a heartbeat. She did not argue. She simply nodded and walked toward a bench with her duffel bag. Everyone's eyes followed her. Some seemed expectant, waiting for a fight. Others looked pleased, as if they had won. A few recruits paused near the water cooler to watch the scene unfold. The older civilian woman shook her head, muttering that this was what happened when people could not let go of the past. She said her uncle had done the same thing, always telling war stories and wearing his old jacket to the grocery store. The man next to her chuckled and whispered that Elena probably just wanted attention. He said at her age it was always about reliving the past. Outside the glass, the young recruit still laughed. Mason Price, louder than the others, shuffled across the pavement like an old woman. The group roared at his imitation. Even those who had not seen Elena's photo on their phones joined in. No one wanted to be left out of the joke. Elena sat on the bench and set her duffel at her feet. She untied her sneakers slowly and carefully, as if each knot held weight. She took a moment to breathe. The sting of humiliation was sharp, but she let it pass over her like so many other moments she had endured. Every base, every deployment, every time she returned to the civilian world, there had always been someone eager to dismiss her. Someone who thought authority meant talking down. She pulled the faded PT shirt over her head and folded it neatly. For a moment her back was bare. The muscle was still strong, though lined with age. The tattoo peeked from under the strap of her sports bra. In the window's reflection she caught sight of herself. She was older, yes, but unbroken. She was living proof against every insult whispered around her. She slipped into the stiff navy t-shirt. It felt heavy and foreign compared to her own. Rising to her feet, she shouldered her bag again. Sanders stood with his arms crossed. His face looked satisfied, as if he had solved a small crisis. He thanked her for understanding, but the words carried no warmth, only the hollow tone of someone following rules. Elena walked back through the lobby. Her steps were slow but measured. She passed the staff behind the counter. One of them offered a false smile and said it was for the best. The woman added that they could not have everyone thinking they were special. Elena did not answer. She had heard it all before. She simply kept walking, shoulders straight, her silence louder than any reply. The words still hurt, even though Elena tried to ignore them. She walked past the lobby and toward the track, keeping her head up and her eyes forward. She refused to give them the reaction they wanted. As she passed a younger woman in uniform, Private Lily Thompson, Elena noticed the girl's eyes flicker, with something that looked like both guilt and respect. For a second, Elena and Thompson locked eyes. Elena gave her a small nod, then kept moving. She didn't need pity. She didn't need approval. Outside, the sun hit her full in the face. It was hot, relentless, and far more honest than the voices inside. Elena had worn many uniforms in her life, but today it seemed her true armor was not cloth or rank. It was patience, strength, and the will to let no one else decide her worth. The air felt heavy, carrying the sting of humiliation from the building. Behind her, it clung to her like smoke. She pushed it down, step by step, as she made her way to the registration tent near the track. The tent, a folding table, blocked her way. Behind it sat another civilian staffer, a young woman with a severe bun pulled so tight it looked painful. A badge glinted on her windbreaker. She didn't even glance up at Elena at first. Name? She asked in a flat, practiced voice. Elena Morgan. I'm here to help with the female recruits evaluation. Authorized by Sergeant Major Harris. Elena placed her ID and the authorization letter on the table. The staffer scrolled slowly on her tablet, her expression blank. She frowned. Not seeing you on the list. You have clearance paperwork. Elena handed her the folded sheet. The woman studied it line by line as if hunting for a mistake. The silence grew thick. Behind Elena, a few recruits waited, whispering as they looked at her. You'll need to wait while I verify this, the staffer finally said, then turned her back and began typing with unnecessary slowness. Minutes dragged on. The sun rose higher, baking the ground and radiating heat into the air. More recruits arrived, laughing, stretching, drinking water, and sneaking glances at Elena. Someone whispered, "Guess they're not letting her in. Can't blame them." Others chuckled. Phones pinged as memes spread. Her picture, her name, twisted into jokes. Elena stood still. She knew this game. She had spent years in worse conditions, waiting with no answers, surrounded by doubt. Harris's words echoed in her head. They'll try to box you out. Don't let them. Still, doubt crept in. What if they turned her away? What if all this effort had been for nothing? Finally, the staffer returned. Still waiting on confirmation from admin. You'll need to wait over there. She pointed at a patch of shade far from the others. Elena nodded, carried her duffel, and sat on the edge of a concrete planter. Sweat gathered on her forehead, but she controlled her breathing, her expression calm. The staff inside the tent whispered together, throwing quick glances in her direction. Time dragged. 10 minutes turned into 20. Every minute seemed stretched thin, the earlier words still echoing. Can't have everyone thinking they're special. More recruits passed by, watching her like she was some lesson or warning. Curiosity shifted into judgment. Some whispered that she was probably in trouble. Others assumed she was being punished. One young soldier laughed loudly to a friend, probably thought she could just take charge. His buddy smirked. Some people don't know when to quit. At the checkpoint table, the staffer pretended to work. She scrolled her tablet, called into her radio, and repeated. Still no response from administration. Each time her eyes flicked toward Elena, it was as if she saw not a volunteer but a trespasser. A senior sergeant eventually came over, his chevrons bright. He asked about the delay. The staffer explained in a quick rush. Authorizations not matching up. Could be a clerical error. She says Sergeant Major Harris sent her, but you know how it is. The NCO gave Elena a once-over, then shrugged. Regulations, can't be too careful. His words might have been meant kindly, but to Elena they sounded like another excuse, another wall put up to keep her out. Inside the admin office, her paperwork sat forgotten. One person had printed it, another misplaced it, and now a third wondered whether to actually call Sergeant Major Harris or just wait until things settled. Bureaucracy didn't need to be cruel to become a weapon. It only needed indifference. Elena's phone buzzed. A message from Harris. Hang in there. If they give you trouble, let me know. She allowed herself a small smile and put the phone away. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her angry. The shade shrank as noon approached. Sweat rolled down her temples. Her patience stretched thin, but she held firm. She would not crack. She would not raise her voice. She knew the strength of silence. After nearly 40 minutes, the staffer returned, looking annoyed but relieved. Admin says you can go through. Next time, bring a printed copy of your clearance. Makes things easier. There was no apology, only dismissal. Elena stood, thanked her calmly, and picked up her duffel. She walked toward the track, shoulders straight. But inside, tension clung like armor. The recruits who had been watching now had different looks. Some seemed embarrassed for how long they'd stared. Others looked at her with quiet respect. They had seen her endure humiliation without a word. They had seen her hold steady under fire of another kind. But Elena knew the day had only begun. A few yards away, Private Mason Price lounged under a half-dead tree, his phone glowing in his hand. The Ridgeline group chat was exploding. Elena's image was already there, captured by Specialist Riley, her sitting alone in the heat, jaw tight, eyes shaded under her cap. Riley's caption blazed across the screen. Commander Grandma lost. On the way to bingo night. The photo spread fast. Laughter followed. Another wave of whispers and jokes was already rolling through the base before Elena even reached the track. But she kept moving. She had lived through worse. She knew what endurance meant. And she wasn't here for their approval. She was here because Harris had trusted her. Because she had something to teach, something worth more than the cruel chatter bouncing from phone to phone. And so, with the sun pressing down and the sting of laughter at her back, Elena stepped onto the track, carrying the weight of her past. And the unshaken strength of someone who refused to break. Price's reply came fast like a shot and the group chat exploded. A new picture showed up. It was Elena pasted into a walker chasing recruits around the track. Across the top someone had written PT Test Senior Division. The joke spread quick. More memes popped up one after another. Elena in a cane. Elena pushing a shopping cart through the PX aisle. Elena as a grandma lost in the mess of young soldiers. The laughter rolled through the group in waves. Most of the recruits were young, barely out of high school, some not even 20 yet. They giggled and leaned together, showing screens. Then their eyes would flick over at Elena, still sitting on the edge of the planter, not moving, not speaking. She sat calm in the heat, sweat running down her temples, and not once flinched. Some of the quieter recruits tried to look busy. They bent to retie their laces or stretch their calves. But their eyes betrayed them. They were watching too. Some were embarrassed. Others were afraid. They knew if they showed sympathy or respect, they could become the next joke. The chat turned meaner. A corporal added, bet she tells stories about walking uphill both ways to basic. Someone else typed, does the Army do refunds on Social Security? The words hit sharp even if Elena pretended they didn't. She had seen this kind of cruelty before. She had heard these kinds of jokes aimed at anyone who stood out or carried scars or looked different. But this time the cruelty dug deeper. It set the mood for the whole morning. The staff at the track began to act different too. They called names, checked lists, and pointed recruits towards stations, but each time Elena walked past, their tone shifted. Their words carried an edge like. She was a punchline in the air. Private Lily Thompson waited for her own evaluation. She scrolled through her phone, lips pressed in a tight line as she read the stream of jokes. She felt the weight of the group's judgment. She had seen before what happened to anyone marked as different. To stand out meant to be mocked. She looked across the field at Elena. She wondered if the stories whispered about her were true. Was she really just a retiree too proud to quit, or was there something the others refused to see? Back near the admin tent, Lieutenant Sanders happened to glance over Riley's shoulder and saw the memes. "That is enough," he said, though his voice carried no strength. He scrolled a little more, lips twitching with a smile, before he stopped himself. He looked official again and turned away, checking his clipboard. But the truth was clear. He was too junior to stop the group and too eager to fit in to risk being their target. Elena felt all of it. She had trained herself to read a room the same way others read maps. She knew when attention turned. Each time a phone screen lit and laughter burst, she knew it was about her. She refused to fold her arms or shrink into herself. She sat straight, chin-high, eyes on the horizon. The recruits split into groups. Some piled on the jokes, eager to belong. Some stayed quiet, unwilling to add but too scared to stop it. Others, mostly the new women, pulled inward, shoulders tense, confidence shrinking. With every meme, among them Lily scanned the faces around her. She hoped someone else felt the same unease. She wondered if dignity could really be stripped so quickly. Could a woman be reduced to nothing just for being older, just for standing there without apology? She watched Mason Price stir up another round of laughter. She watched his friends cheer him on. Then she looked again at Elena, still calm, still patient, still unbroken. Lily wondered if she would ever have that strength if the roles reversed. Jokes spilled from phones into open air. "Heard we are getting a pharmacy discount today," one recruit shouted. More laughter. The staff at the registration table grinned, trading remarks just quiet enough to avoid trouble. Even the training NCO, usually stern, cracked a smile when his phone lit up. The picture was Elena leading a PT run from a scooter. The crowd roared. The mood had shifted from quiet mockery to open dismissal. Elena was not just a target, she was a shared joke. Yet beneath the laughter a small undercurrent grew. Some of the women had looked forward to meeting her. They had been curious about a seasoned veteran stepping back onto the track. Now they hesitated. If the group was right and Elena was nothing but a relic, then what did that mean for them? Would they too one day be mocked for daring to stand tall, for lasting long enough to be different? Elena heard it all. She saw the glances, felt the weight of the jokes. Still she gave no sign. She bent to check her bag. She stretched her legs. She reviewed her notes. Her calm posture told its own story. She was not here for approval. She was not here for comfort. Years had taught her something most of them did not know yet. Sometimes the lesson was not for those who mocked. It was for those who watched and wondered if they could endure. Time passed. The fever of the group chat cooled as the evaluations approached. But the damage was done. The story of the day had been written. Elena Morgan out of place, out of time. She caught Lily's eyes across the field. A small nod passed between them. Like a private message. "You are not alone." Lily felt her chest loosen. She realized she had been holding her breath. On the far side of the track, Mason Price crafted one last meme. He tagged it, "Old soldiers never die, they just hold up the line." His friends burst into laughter again. But this time some recruits stayed quiet. Beneath the mockery, curiosity stirred. A few young women began to watch Elena more closely. They studied the way she carried herself, steady shoulders, lifted stride unbroken. She did not look ashamed. She did not look broken. She looked certain. The desert sun burned away what little coolness remained. By late morning, Elena was finally cleared for the track. She slung her duffel over her shoulder and walked with measured steps. Every stair pressed against her back, but she moved steady. She reached the far end of the bleachers and chose a seat half in shadow, half in light. For the first time that morning, she allowed her arms to stretch wide, her shoulders to roll. and the stiffness to ease, nearby Staff Sergeant Mike Alvarez walked past clipboard in hand, his brow locked on lists and numbers. He prided himself on order, on keeping the day running smooth. He had no time for gossip. But something in the corner of his eye caught him. Elena reached back to tie her hair. Her shirt, damp with sweat, clung to her back. For a brief second, a tattoo showed through. Not flashy, not decorative. Blocky numbers 819 framed by the wings of a falcon claws stretched wide. Alvarez froze. The clipboard went heavy in his hands. His memory pulled back years. A briefing whispered behind closed doors. A codename half redacted from reports. Night Falcon 819. The mission spoken about in hushed voices, never to be repeated. He remembered. The map's the casualty counts the silence that followed every mention. And now here it was inked across the back of the woman everyone mocked. Elena Morgan, sitting calm under the weight of 1,000 eyes. Elena gave a small nod. She did not need to say anything. The message was clear. Every soldier and staff member saw and understood. This was not just an apology. It was a public correction, a reminder that honor should never be hidden or dismissed. Major Bennett then turned to Lieutenant Sanders. His face was tight with shame, his eyes downcast. She ordered him to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. She said command policy was now updated. Veterans who supported training could wear the proper parts of their uniforms if the commander approved. Any questions would go to her office or to Colonel McCall. Sanders swallowed and nodded. Colonel McCall then faced the recruits gathered in a wide half circle. His voice was steady but powerful. He told them they had all seen what happened that day. Every base, every generation sometimes forgets what their foundation is built on. It is built on those who came before. He told them not to let rules or opinions blind them to real character and real courage. He said if they were lucky, they would serve beside people like Sergeant First Class Morgan. They would learn more from her than from any manual he could assign. A quiet murmur moved through the recruits. At the edge of the group, Private Lily Thompson felt her chest tighten with pride. She remembered the steady look Elena had given her earlier. That look now seemed like an invitation to stand tall, to refuse to be small when others mock her. Elena herself felt emotions stirring deep inside. She was grateful, but also reminded of old wounds that would never fully heal. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes glimmered as McCall stepped closer. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. He thanked her for coming back, for not walking away when she easily could have. Elena answered softly. She said she came because someone had to show the younger generation that strength was not always about being loud. Sometimes it was simply about standing your ground. McCall nodded. He understood. With emotion, McCall signaled for her to join him. Together they walked toward the front of the formation. The recruits parted to let them pass. The staff who had doubted her earlier now lowered their eyes or gave small, awkward nods. Mason Price, who had led the jokes, stared hard at the ground. The lesson was clear on his face. The atmosphere had shifted completely. There was no more laughter at Elena's expense. A quiet respect filled the air. Soldiers watched her not with mockery but with reverence. Some honors could not be taken away by age or by rules. Some heroes did not need medals to prove their worth. The sun blazed hotter as the base returned to its daily rhythm, but the mood had been forever changed. News of McCall's salute and Bennett's apology spread quickly. Recruits lingered, not to mock but to watch Elena Morgan with new eyes. Even the loudest voices of mockery now stayed quiet, stepping carefully around her. They knew they had witnessed something far more important than any drill or training rule later. Elena found a quiet spot under the bleachers. She needed a moment alone. Her thoughts circled around the events of the morning and the faces of those who had been watching. She had never craved speeches or attention, but she understood the weight of example. Sometimes the way one person carried themselves could set the tone for an entire generation. Footsteps approached. Light and cautious, but steady. Elena looked up to see Private Lily Thompson standing near, holding a water bottle. Her cap was crooked, her eyes bright but nervous. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Lily said softly. I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. I saw how you handled it. I wanted to ask, how do you do it? How do you not let it get to you when people talk? Elena studied her for a moment, measuring her sincerity. Then she answered plainly. She said it did get to her. But after a while, You learned not to show it unless you had to. Sometimes the only way to teach people was to refuse to break, no matter how hard they pushed. If you showed them weakness, that was what they would remember, not your strength. Lily tightened her grip on the bottle. She asked if Elena had always been that strong. Her voice dropped with honesty, carrying the same doubt Elena herself had. Once felt, Elena shook her head. No, she had not always been strong. She explained that when she started, she doubted herself every single day. She wondered if she was good enough for the army, good enough for her team, good enough for herself. The secret was not to erase the doubt, but to keep moving anyway. Even when afraid. Even when mocked. Even when told she did not belong. Her eyes moved out to the open field, where recruits lined up for their next drill. She told Lily that one day she would find her own way. The important thing was not to let the noise drown out her reason for being there. Lily breathed deeply, taking it in. "Thank you," she whispered. "I think that's what I needed." For the first time that morning, Lily smiled. It was small, but it carried determination. It was the kind of smile that promised she would keep going, no matter how hard things became. The sound of boots and shouted orders faded into the background. Between Elena and Lily, there was a small pause that felt private in the middle of all. The noise of the base. Elena saw Lily's hesitation but waited with patience. She waited the way only someone who had carried real weight in life could. After a moment, Lily blurted out her question. She asked if it ever felt unfair that people judged her by her uniform or her age and decided what she could or could not do. Lily flushed red as soon as the words left her mouth, but her eyes stayed fixed on Elena. Elena answered gently, though her tone carried the weight of experience. She said it happened all the time. Not just in the army. People often measured others by the things that were easy to see. A faded shirt. A grey hair. A rumor that was not true. It was their defense. If they could put you in a box, they did not have to wonder what you might actually be able to do. She leaned back, letting the sunlight touch the tattoo on her back for a moment. She said the truth was that the things that matter most, like courage, patience and loyalty, do not show on the outside. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who speak the least. They are the ones who hold their ground when it would be easier to walk away. Her eyes locked on Lily, steady and kind. She said quiet strength was not about silence. It was about refusing to let the noise of others make you forget who you are. Lily thought about that, and her face shifted from doubt to determination. She looked out at the field where the recruits were lined up waiting for their turn under the sun. She asked softly if it ever got easier to hold on to what mattered. When the world tried to make you let go, Elena paused before answering. She said sometimes it did and sometimes it got harder. But it was always worth it. There would be days when you were the joke, the outsider, or the easy target. And there would be days when someone needed you to show them that it was possible to keep going even when it hurt. That was what service meant. Not the uniform. Not the rank. But the choice to continue when you were tired or scared or doubted. She reached out and put a hand on Lily's shoulder. The gesture was both comfort and challenge. She told her that she would not always see the difference she made, but if she stayed true to herself, she would give someone else the courage to stand up. That was the legacy that mattered. Not medals or recognition, but the quiet ripple that came from refusing to give up. Lily smiled. The last trace of fear left her face. Her shoulders straightened. She promised she would remember. She said she would try to be that kind of person too. Then she jogged off to join her unit. Elena watched her go. For all the pain of the morning, this was the reason she had returned. Not to prove herself, but to show the next generation that strength could be quiet yet contagious. The noon sun was high and harsh now. It glinted off the track as the recruits lined up for their run. Elena stepped out of the shade. She had changed back into her old PT shirt. The tattooed numbers on her back caught the sunlight for all to see. No one stopped her. No one challenged her. The air held only quiet respect. The staff and NCOs who had doubted or mocked her before now watched with regret. Some nodded to her. A few gave her a quiet as she walked past. Colonel McCall stood with arms folded at the edge of the track. His presence anchored the mood. This was no longer about rules. It was about example. It was about legacy. Major Bennett with her clipboard organized the trainers, but her eyes often drifted to Elena as if drawing strength from her presence. Elena walked to the front of the formation. The recruits were restless, still buzzing from what had happened earlier. Mason Price stood a few rows back, hands on his hips. His swagger was gone. He glanced sideways at Lily Thompson, who now held. Her head high with her jaw set and her shoulders firm just like Elena, the whistle blew. Elena set off at a steady pace. Her stride was even and strong though never showy. The recruits followed. Some tried to match her right away. Others held back afraid of burning out. Soon the first lap ended and the effort began to show. Heavy breathing spread through the line. Sweat ran down faces. Legs burned with the strain of keeping up. But Elena ran as she always had. Calm. Steady. Silent. She gave no orders and shouted no encouragement. Her leadership was a living lesson. Push forward not for applause but because it was the right thing to do. Halfway through the run, Mason Price began to falter. His sarcastic voice that once led the group had nothing left. He struggled for breath trying to keep pace. Lily ran forward instead. She matched Elena stride for stride. Her determination pulled others with her. The recruits were inspired not by competition but by the quiet will of the woman leading them. Even the staff began to cheer without sarcasm. They called out encouragement, telling them to follow Sergeant Morgan. On the final lap, Elena's chest rose and fell heavily, but she stayed upright. When she crossed the finish line, she did not collapse. She did not raise her arms or claim the spotlight. She turned and waited. She stayed until every last recruit crossed the line. She gave each one a nod or a quiet word. Her calm presence soothed the tension of the morning. For a long moment the group lay in the grass catching their breath. No one spoke. The air was heavy with exhaustion but also with understanding. A pride had taken root. Where there had been mockery, there was now respect. A whisper moved through the group. Someone asked if this was Night Falcon. The rumor spread. But not as ridicule. It spread as awe. The story of Night Falcon was no longer a ghost from the past. It was a living example standing right before them. The officers and NCOs left the field in pairs. Each replayed the morning's events in silence. Elena gathered her duffel and water bottle. She looked at the track one last time. A few recruits approached her. Some were shy. Some were bold with gratitude. Mason Price, red in the face from the run, stepped forward awkwardly. He held out a hand and muttered, "Thanks, Sergeant Morgan." He could not finish his thought, but Elena nodded. Her forgiveness was clear without words. Lily ran up beside her, still out of breath but smiling wide. She asked if Elena would be coming back. Elena answered that if they would have her, she would. But she told Lily she did not need her anymore. That day Lily had learned she was stronger than the things people said. Lily grinned, standing taller. She said it still helped to see it for real. Near the motor pool, Colonel McCall and Major Bennett waited. They greeted Elena as an equal. McCall simply said thank you. His words were heavier than ceremony. He said she had reminded them all of what this place was supposed to mean. Bennett handed Elena an envelope. Inside was her clearance, officially extended for as long as she wanted. The door was always open. Elena nodded her gratitude. She walked to her truck. She saw recruits in small groups. Some watched her go. Others retold the story of the day. The laughter that floated across the field now was free of cruelty. It carried respect and hope. She started the engine. The old truck rumbled to life. She paused for one last look at Fort Ridgeline. The place of old memories was now a place where something new had begun. The sun lowered and the shadows stretched across the field. The tattoo on her back caught the light one more time. As she drove out past the gate, the wind picked up, carrying dust down the road. Elena smiled, feeling the weight ease from her shoulders. She knew her story would remain here long after she was gone. It would not be a cautionary tale. It would be a reminder. The recruits who had mocked her would remember. The ones who had believed in her would lead with strength. At the edge of the base, she glanced in the mirror. Fort Ridgeline shrank in the distance, but its mark on her life would not fade. Somewhere a new rumor was already being born. That sometimes the quietest presence left the loudest echo. That true legacy was not carved in stone or stitched on uniforms, but carried in the hearts of those who saw real courage. Elena's truck rolled toward the horizon. One chapter had closed, but a dozen more had quietly begun inside Fort Ridgeline. Her story echoed in the hearts of the young soldiers she left behind.